Why do so many people live their entire lives in the shadows of their own potential? Most people dream big when they're young. They imagine themselves as leaders, creators, world changers. But somewhere along the way, comfort replaces courage, fear silences ambition, and routine buries passion. This is the silent story of why so many stay average, when greatness was always possible. Picture a young man walking through his city at night. Neon lights glow above him, but his eyes are heavy, his spirit drained. He once dreamed of starting his own company, of creating something that mattered. But years of maybe tomorrow, and what if I fail, chained him to a job he never loved. Each morning, he wakes up to the alarm, not to a purpose. Each evening, he sits in silence, scrolling through the lives of others, wondering why his own never changed. The truth, it wasn't talent that held him back, it was comfort. The average life isn't chosen in one moment, it's built by 1,000 small surrenders, by saying later instead of now. But here's the twist. The same man, if he dares to break the cycle, could rise. By saying yes to discomfort, yes to learning, yes to risk. Because the difference between average and extraordinary is one decision made daily. The night pressed heavy over the neighborhood, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful but suffocating, as if the whole world is holding its breath. Inside a small house at the edge of a forgotten street, a boy lay awake in his bed. The mattress springs dug into his back, but he didn't move. His eyes wandered across the cracked ceiling, following the faint shadows cast by the streetlight sneaking in through the torn curtain. Most children his age would have been lost in dreams of superheroes or candy. But his imagination carried him further, into worlds no one around him dared to imagine. On the wall beside him, taped in uneven rows, were pages torn from his notebook. Rockets rising into skies, cities of glass and steel, bridges stretching into clouds. To outsiders, they were childish sketches. To him, they were blueprints of the life he had promised himself. He rolled over, clutching that notebook to his chest as though it were sacred. On its first page, written in pencil strokes shaky but determined, were 4 words. I will be more. They weren't just words. They were his rebellion, a whisper of defiance against the story life had written for him. His mother's tired breathing filled the next room. She had come home late again from the diner, the smell of fried food clinging to her uniform. She was strong, but exhaustion had hollowed her face. His father's absence was louder than any noise. He hadn't been home for days. Nobody asked anymore where he went, but the boy noticed. He noticed everything. And in noticing, he made a decision. He would not inherit the silence. He would not inherit the surrender. Every night, when the rest of the world surrendered to sleep, he stayed awake, staring through that dusty window at the flickering street lamp. He pretended it was a signal from another universe, telling him to hold on, to believe, to keep building his world in the pages of his notebook. At school, it was different. His teacher called him distracted. Classmates mocked him for always drawing. One boy, taller and meaner, once snatched the notebook and tore out a page. "You'll never build this," he sneered, waving the sketch of a tall tower. The laughter stung like needles, but deep down, it forged something stronger, a hunger to prove them wrong. That night, the boy sat by the window with tears drying on his cheeks. "I'm not like them," he whispered into the darkness. "I can't be average." His voice trembled, but his spirit didn't. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But he knew he would rise. The next morning, before the sun was fully awake, he ran outside barefoot, dew soaking the ground, the cold air cutting his skin. He spread his arms as if to catch the light itself. His neighbors shook their heads. "That boy's always daydreaming," one muttered, carrying groceries into the house. But the boy didn't flinch. To him, the light wasn't just light. It was possibility. He sat on the curb with his notebook open, listening to cars hum past. From open windows came songs about money and fame. But he wanted something deeper. He wanted to create, to build, to change. He didn't crave applause. He craved impact. He wanted to leave something behind that would outlive him, something no one could tear apart. On a fresh page, his pencil scratched out another promise. Dreams are stronger than fear. The words weren't elegant, the handwriting wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the fire inside him, the refusal to let life shrink him into the shape of ordinary. Years later, he would look back on that night, that silence, that notebook, and realize it was the moment everything began. Not with applause, not with recognition, but with a child, a spark, and a dream too stubborn to die. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth and the distant hum of traffic. The boy walked slowly to school, his notebook tucked carefully under his arm as though it were a fragile treasure. Around him, the small town stirred to life, shopkeepers rolling up shutters, buses coughing out clouds of smoke, neighbors exchanging weary good mornings. To anyone else, it was just another ordinary day. But to him, it felt like walking into a battle he hadn't signed up for. The school stood like a tired old monument, bricks faded and windows clouded with fingerprints and dust. Children swarmed the yard, their laughter sharp, their energy restless. He moved quietly through them, unnoticed at first, until one of the older boys caught sight of the notebook. "Still carrying that thing?" The boy sneered, pointing with mock curiosity. "What's in it today? Another flying car? Another city in the clouds?" His friends laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. The dreamer held the notebook tighter, his jaw clenched. He wanted to answer, to tell them that yes, it was another city, another invention, another world waiting to be built. But instead, he lowered his gaze and kept walking. Inside the classroom, the walls were covered with faded posters, times tables, the alphabet, motivational quotes that no one seemed to believe. The teacher, a woman with kind but tired eyes, handed out worksheets. "Stay focused," she reminded the class. Her words were aimed more at him than anyone else, because while the others filled in blanks and circled answers, he sketched in the margins. Towers that reached higher than clouds, machines that healed instead of harmed, bridges that connected more than just land, they connected people. The teacher sighed when she saw his drawings. "You need to pay attention," she said softly, not unkindly. But the boy only nodded, his eyes drifting back to his paper. To him, attention wasn't the problem. The problem was that the world inside the classroom felt so much smaller than the world inside his mind. At lunch, he sat alone under the shade of an old oak tree. His sandwich remained untouched as he flipped through his notebook, adding new lines to his sketches. Across the yard, groups of children shouted, traded snacks, gossiped about things that would be forgotten by tomorrow. But he was building futures, one pencil stroke at a time. Still, loneliness weighed on him. He watched the others laughing, belonging. For a moment, he wondered what it would feel like to be part of that, to be accepted. But then his eyes fell back to the page, and the thought faded. Belonging was temporary. Dreams were forever. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, he walked home slowly, dragging his feet along the cracked sidewalk. The world around him looked ordinary. Houses with peeling paint, cars parked crookedly on driveways, dogs barking behind chain-link fences. But inside his notebook, the world was alive, limitless. When he reached home, his mother was already gone for her evening shift. The house was quiet again, too quiet. He placed the notebook on the table and stared at it. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if they're right? What if I never build any of this? What if I'm just wasting time? He closed his eyes, remembering the laughter of his classmates, the way they mocked him. The doubt pressed harder. But then he thought of the streetlight outside his window, the way it flickered like a secret code, the way it felt like it was speaking to him. He opened the notebook again, his hand steady now. On a blank page, he wrote, "The walls of this town are small, but my mind is bigger." He stared at the sentence until it burned into him. And in that moment, something shifted. The town might have been small. The people might have doubted him. But as long as he had that notebook, as long as he had his imagination, he wasn't trapped. That night, he climbed onto the roof of the house. The shingles were rough against his skin, the air cool and sharp. From there, he could see the whole neighborhood, the tired houses, the dim streetlights, the quiet roads. To most, it looked ordinary. To him, it looked like a canvas. He stretched out his arms, as if painting the future with invisible strokes. Skyscrapers where broken buildings stood, bridges where empty lots spread, lights that reached beyond the horizon. He whispered into the night, One day they'll see. One day they'll know. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel small. The days blurred together, each one marked by the same rhythm: wake up, school, home, silence. But then came the day that would carve the first deep wound into his belief. It started like any other morning. The boy walking to school with his notebook pressed close, his head full of worlds no one else could see. The sky was pale, clouds dragging themselves across it lazily, as if even they had no urgency. He felt the weight of the notebook more than ever, not because it was heavy, but because it carried the only thing he truly owned: his dream. In class, the teacher announced a project. Everyone will stand up and share something you've been working on. It can be anything: an essay, a poem, even artwork. The room buzzed with chatter. For most of the children, it was an easy task. For him, it was a chance. For the first time, he thought maybe the world would listen. He sat in his corner, fingers tracing the edges of his notebook, heart thumping. He imagined standing in front of them, showing his cities, his bridges, his inventions. Maybe they'd laugh at first, but maybe one of them would understand. Maybe the teacher would smile. Maybe someone would believe in him. When his turn came, he walked slowly to the front, notebook clutched in trembling hands. His throat was dry, but he opened it, flipping to the page with his proudest sketch: a tower that stretched higher than the clouds, with spirals of glass and steel reflecting the sun. "This," he began, his voice shaky, "this is what I want to build one day. A tower so high, it feels like touching the sky. A place where people can come together, no matter who they are." The room was silent for a moment, and his chest swelled with hope. But then it happened. A snicker from the back. Then another. Laughter broke out, sharp and cruel, spreading like fire. "A tower? You can't even finish your homework," one boy shouted. Another chimed in. "Yeah, maybe you'll build it out of crayons." The boy's face burned. He tried to keep going, tried to explain, but the words tangled in his throat. The teacher raised her hand to quiet the class, but her eyes showed pity, not belief. That cut deeper than the laughter. Pity was worse than cruelty. It meant even she didn't see him as capable. He forced a smile, closed the notebook, and walked back to his seat. Each step felt like dragging chains. His dream, which had always felt like a flame, suddenly flickered. For the first time, doubt crept in, not from his own heart, but from the voices of others. At recess, the kids didn't let it go. "Hey, Sky Tower," one boy called, mocking. "How's your city in the clouds?" They laughed, pointing, circling him like vultures. He kept his head down, clutching the notebook tight. He wanted to fight back, to scream, but his voice felt locked away. Instead, he sat alone beneath the oak tree, tracing the lines of his drawing with his finger, as if trying to remind himself it was real. That night, the silence of his room felt heavier than ever. He opened the notebook, staring at the tower. The lines blurred as tears filled his eyes. "Maybe they're right," he whispered. "Maybe I'll never build this. Maybe I'm just a kid with paper and pencils." The words broke something inside him. For the first time, he considered closing the notebook for good. But then, as he lay there, his eyes drifted to the flickering streetlight outside his window. It blinked, steady and stubborn, as if refusing to be swallowed by the dark. He sat up, wiping his tears, staring at it. Maybe it was silly, but to him, that light was a sign, a reminder that even small flames mattered, that even when surrounded by darkness, you could choose to shine. He opened the notebook again, picked up his pencil, and beneath the drawing of the tower he wrote, "Even if they laugh, I will not stop." The words weren't loud. They weren't confident, but they were a promise. Years later, he would remember that day not as the end of his dream, but as its testing ground. The laughter, the doubt, the pity, it all cut deep. But scars have a way of becoming strength. And sometimes, the first wound is what teaches you how to fight. The boy was growing older now. Time had a way of moving faster than he realized, each season blurring into the next, carrying with it new responsibilities, new distractions, and the slow erosion of childhood courage. What once burned like a wildfire inside him was beginning to flicker, like a candle fighting against the wind. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about losing courage. You don't notice the moment it slips away. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't crash like a wave. It seeps into you quietly, disguised as small choices, harmless excuses, little compromises that seem meaningless in the moment, but add up until suddenly, you've built yourself a cage. At first, he told himself he was just taking a break. The notebook stayed on his desk, unopened for days, then weeks. His hands itched to draw, but the memory of his classmates' laughter still haunted him. Every time he picked up the pencil, their voices echoed. Up the tower? You. Out of crayons. The sting of their doubt was louder than the call of his dream. So instead, he reached for what was easy. Video games, television, scrolling through endless images on borrowed phones, living in the lives of others instead of creating his own. It was comfortable, numbing. And in that comfort, his courage quietly atrophied. His mother noticed. One evening after her long shift, she walked past his room and saw him lying on the bed, the notebook unopened beside him. She paused in the doorway. "You don't draw anymore," she said softly. He shrugged, pretending not to care. "Just busy," he lied. She looked at him for a long time, something unspoken in her eyes, but she didn't push. She was too tired, too consumed by survival. She turned away. That night, the boy stared at the ceiling again. The same cracked ceiling that had once been a canvas for his imagination now felt like a mirror, reflecting back only his hesitation. He whispered, "Tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow." But tomorrow came, and courage did not. At school, his teacher announced another chance, an art competition for the district. "This could be your opportunity," she said, handing out flyers. His heart skipped. For a moment, he imagined entering, imagined showing them what he could do. But then doubt struck. What if they laugh again? What if I fail in front of everyone? He tucked the flyer into his bag, but never filled it out. When the competition day came, he told himself he was too busy. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. But deep inside it did. Comfort had won. Courage had lost. And yet, the dream never fully disappeared. It lingered, quiet but alive, like an ember buried beneath ashes. When he was alone, late at night, he sometimes flipped open the notebook, running his fingers over the faded sketches. The drawing seemed to look back at him, disappointed. They asked without words, "Why did you stop? Why did you let them win?" One night, he sat on the roof again, staring at the horizon. The stars glittered, distant and indifferent. He whispered, "Maybe it's easier this way. Maybe dreams are meant to stay dreams." His voice cracked, not with conviction, but with surrender. But then, as if the universe refused to let him quit, a memory surfaced. The first night he had written, "I will be more." He saw his small hands gripping the pencil, his young eyes burning with defiance. He realized that boy, that younger version of himself, had been braver than he was now. And the truth cut deep. He had betrayed that child. The next day at school, he overheard two classmates talking. "You hear about the competition winner? Kid from the next town. They said his design might get published." Their voices stung. Not because he wanted the praise, but because he realized it could have been him. That night, he opened his notebook again. He stared at the empty page, pencil in hand. His heart raced. This was the moment, the choice between comfort and courage. His hand hovered, but he couldn't do it. He snapped the notebook shut, and in that sound, the sharp slap of paper closing, was the sound of surrender. For the first time, his dream felt truly fragile, as if it could shatter forever. Fear doesn't come like thunder. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling across a field, until everything around you is hidden, until even your own reflection feels unfamiliar. For the boy, fear wore the face of judgment, mocking voices, narrowed eyes, and the constant whisper that he wasn't enough. It started with little moments. A classroom presentation where his voice cracked and the kids laughed. A science project where he had drawn a design too ambitious, too wild, and the teacher had said gently, "Maybe try something simpler." Simpler. The word echoed in him like a curse. Why should he make his ideas smaller just because the world was afraid of bigger? But the laughter, the whispers, the sighs of dismissal, each one chipped away at him. Soon, whenever he opened his notebook, He didn't see skyscrapers or inventions. He saw faces, the smirks of classmates, the raised brows of teachers, even the tired eyes of his mother when she said, "Just focus on school, okay? Don't make life harder than it already is." The notebook began to feel heavier than ever, not because of the paper, but because of the eyes he imagined staring at it. He hid it under his mattress, ashamed of the very thing that once gave him life. He told himself it was just a phase, that he'd pick it up again later. But the truth was darker. He was running from judgment. At school, he began to blend in. He laughed at the same jokes, copied the same styles, pretended not to care about anything. It was easier, safer. But inside, he felt hollow, like he was betraying someone important himself. One afternoon, the teacher asked the class to share what they wanted to be when they grew up. Children shouted with confidence, doctor, lawyer, athlete, singer. When it came to him, he hesitated. His heart screamed, architect, builder, dreamer. But his lips betrayed him. "I don't know," he muttered. The class moved on without pause, but the shame stayed. That night, lying in bed, he whispered to himself, "I do know. I've always known, but I'm too afraid to say it." The fear of judgment didn't just silence him in school. It followed him everywhere. At the store, he hesitated to speak up. Around relatives, he avoided questions. Even with friends, he kept his dreams locked inside, terrified they would laugh, terrified they would confirm the voice in his head, "You're not good enough." But the dream refused to die quietly. Some nights, it clawed its way back, filling his chest with fire. He would reach for his notebook, only to pull his hand back. "What if they're right?" he whispered. "What if I'm nothing but a fool with drawings?" One evening, he found himself in the library. He wandered aimlessly, hands brushing against shelves, until a book caught his eye. The Wright Brothers. He pulled it out, flipping through the pages. Two men, mocked and doubted, building a flying machine when the world said it was impossible. His heart raced. They had been laughed at too. They had been dismissed. But they didn't stop. He sat there for hours, devouring the story, the courage, the persistence. And for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. If they could rise above judgment, maybe he could too. Walking home under the night sky, the air sharp and cold, he looked up at the stars. He whispered, "If they had listened to the laughter, we'd never have flown. So why am I letting fear ground me?" Back in his room, he pulled the notebook from under the mattress. His hand shook as he opened it, as though facing an old friend he had abandoned. The drawing stared back at him. Towers, bridges, impossible dreams. He smiled through tears. "I'm sorry I left you," he whispered. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Fear is a prison. Judgment is the lock, but courage is the key." He closed the notebook, holding it against his chest. The fear wasn't gone. It never really goes away. But that night, for the first time, he realized something important. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. And though the voices of judgment would always be there, he decided they would not decide his life. Someday, it became his favorite word, a shield he could hide behind, a soft whisper that made delay feel like destiny. He told himself he would chase his dreams someday, when he had more money, when he was older, when life wasn't so hard. He said it so often that it began to sound like a promise, even though deep inside, he knew it was an excuse. Every time he opened his notebook, his chest burned with fire. He wanted to build, to create, to show the world what was possible. But then the fear of judgment, the weight of responsibilities, the endless noise of survival, all of it pushed him back. And so he would whisper again, "Not today. Someday." Weeks turned into months. Months slipped into years. The boy grew taller, his voice deeper, but his dreams stayed hidden in that old notebook, pages yellowing with time. He would glance at it from across the room, like an old friend he couldn't bring himself to call. Sometimes he even dusted it off, tracing the lines of his old drawings. But he never added new ones. "Not now," he muttered. "Someday." At school, others were making plans, college applications, part-time jobs, future careers. They spoke of ambition with certainty. He stayed quiet, nodding, smiling, pretending to be undecided. But inside, he knew exactly what he wanted. He just didn't have the courage to admit it. The word someday had become a chain around his heart. One rainy evening, as the sky wept against his window, he sat on the floor of his room, staring at that notebook. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt. "What am I waiting for?" he whispered. But the answer was silence. He thought back to a childhood afternoon when he had raised his arms to the sun, fearless and bold, ready to change the world. Where had that boy gone? He realized something painful. He had traded his fire for comfort, his passion for excuses. And excuses always sounded noble when wrapped in the word someday. The rain outside grew heavier, like the sky itself was scolding him. He closed his eyes and imagined the future. 10 years from now, 20. Would he still be whispering someday? Would he die with his dreams buried under the mattress, never given life? The thought shook him. The next day, he walked to the park, notebook clutched under his arm. Children were playing, their laughter piercing the gray air. One boy, younger than him, was stacking sticks into a crooked little tower. It collapsed again and again, but the boy laughed every time, rebuilding without hesitation. Watching him, something clicked. Children don't wait for someday. They just try, fail, and try again. He sat on the bench, rain-damp pages open, pencil trembling at his hand. People walked past, some glancing, some ignoring. His chest tightened. The fear of judgment returned, whispering, "They'll laugh. They'll think you're strange." But then another voice rose inside him, fierce and familiar. What if you wait forever? What if someday never comes? He put pencil to paper. The first line was shaky, hesitant, but then another, stronger, and another. The tower grew taller. The bridge stretched longer. The city bloomed across the page. His heart raced. His hands moved faster, like the fire had been waiting all these years just to explode. Tears blurred his vision, dripping onto the paper. Not tears of sadness, but of release. He whispered aloud, almost to himself, "I've wasted too much time on someday. Today is all I have. Today is where I begin." The sky began to clear, sunlight breaking through the clouds, golden and fierce. He looked up, the light warm on his face, and smiled for the first time in years. Because he finally understood the truth. Someday is a lie. The only real time is now. And in that moment, with the sun on his skin and the dream alive in his hands, he chose to start. Not tomorrow, not someday, but today. The mirror had always been his quiet enemy. Not because it lied, but because it told the truth. Every morning, he stood in front of it, rubbing his tired eyes, pulling on the same worn-out jacket, forcing a smile that didn't belong to him. The reflection staring back was not the boy with sparks in his eyes, who once dreamed of building rockets and cities. It was someone else, someone heavier, someone carrying invisible chains. One morning, as the cold air crept into his room, he leaned closer to the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot from another sleepless night. His face looked older than his age, weighed down not by time, but by regret. He touched the glass, as though reaching for the child he used to be. For a moment, he thought he saw him, the boy, bright and fearless, laughing in the sunlight. But then the vision cracked into the tired reflection that had become his reality. He whispered, "What happened to you?" But the mirror had no answers. That day, he carried the question with him everywhere, through the crowded bus ride, past the busy streets, into the office where he filed papers that meant nothing to him. His co-workers joked, laughed, scrolled on their phones, but he was trapped in silence. His dream was still alive, but buried, screaming inside him. At lunch, he sat alone, watching raindrops race down the cafeteria window. A memory hit him, the same rain years ago, when he had promised himself to never settle, to never give up. Yet here he was, a prisoner of routine. When did I trade my dream for safety? When did I accept a life that wasn't mine? That night, he came home to the mirror again. He stared so long that his reflection blurred into shadows. His fists clenched. Anger rose, raw and sharp. He hated what he saw, not because he was weak, but because he had betrayed himself. And betrayal of self is the deepest wound of all. Without thinking, he slammed his fist into the mirror. The glass shattered, pieces scattering across the floor, glittering like broken stars. Blood welled up on his knuckles, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt alive. He sank to the floor, glass crunching beneath him, and sobbed. Not the quiet sobs of someone hiding, but the loud, guttural cries of someone finally confronting the truth. He wasn't crying because of pain or failure. He was crying because he had finally seen it. His reflection was never the enemy. The real enemy was his silence, his fear, his excuses. He picked up one shard of glass, careful not to cut deeper. The fragment showed only part of his face, his eye, still wet with tears. But in that single eye, he saw something. A spark. The same spark from childhood. Dimmed, yes. Almost lost. But not gone. He whispered again, this time with fire in his voice. I remember you. The next morning, he didn't avoid the mirror. He stood in front of the broken frame, cracks running like lightning across the surface. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled through the pain. The cracks no longer represented failure. They represented awakening. Because sometimes, you have to shatter the old image of yourself before you can build the new one. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift. His reflection wasn't perfect, but it was real. And from that brokenness, he knew. He was ready to rebuild. Stronger, sharper, fearless. Because broken mirrors don't just show scars. They show possibilities. The morning after the mirror shattered, the room felt different. The cold walls seemed less suffocating. The cracks in the glass less mocking. He wrapped a bandage around his bleeding hand. But inside, something else was healing. For years, he had moved through life like a ghost. Existing, not living. But now, as he buttoned up his shirt, a new question stirred in his chest. What if I tried again? What if it's not too late? The streets outside were buzzing with ordinary life. Cars honked. Children rushed to school. Shopkeepers shouted prices into the air. He walked slower than usual, noticing things he had long ignored. The color of the sky, the sound of laughter, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery. For the first time, the world wasn't just background noise. It was alive, and so was he. He carried an old notebook in his bag, the same one he used as a child. Pages filled with sketches of impossible inventions and bold ideas. He hadn't opened it in years, too ashamed to look at what he had once believed he could do. But that day, sitting on a park bench, he flipped it open. The pages were yellowed, the pencil marks faded, but the dreams were still breathing. His fingers trembled as he traced the lines of a rocket he had drawn at 12 years old. Tears welled in his eyes. He whispered to himself, "This is where I begin again." It wasn't easy. Doubt attacked immediately. You're too old. You've wasted too much time. No one cares about your dreams anymore. The voices in his head were loud, cruel. But he remembered the broken mirror, the spark he saw in his own eyes, and he knew. Fear could scream, but it could no longer control him. That evening, instead of collapsing on the couch, he sat at his desk. He cleared the clutter, lit a small lamp, and opened his notebook beside a blank sheet of paper. His heart pounded. He picked up a pen, paused, then pressed it to the page. The first line was shaky, uncertain, but it was there. The first step. Hours passed unnoticed. Ideas poured out, messy but alive. He wrote about projects, goals, plans. He wasn't sure how he'd make them real, but writing them felt like planting seeds. And seeds, no matter how small, have the power to split concrete. Midnight came, but instead of exhaustion, he felt electric. He looked around his tiny room, the broken mirror on the wall, the scattered shards still on the floor, the notebook glowing under the lamplight. For once, he didn't see failure. He saw a beginning. He whispered to himself, like a vow, "Tomorrow, I take the next step, and the day after another, until this dream walks, until it runs." Outside, the world slept, but inside that small room, a man was finally waking up. Because greatness never begins with giant leaps. It begins with a single, trembling step forward. The next morning, the city woke in chaos, but inside his chest there was silence. Silence filled not with emptiness, but with focus. He had barely slept. His desk still littered with sketches and notes, his pen still stained with ink. Yet instead of exhaustion, his veins carried fire. The fire he thought he had lost long ago. He walked to work as he always did, blending into the tide of tired faces and half-finished coffees. But something was different. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He carried with him a secret, a burning spark no one else could see. And that spark made him walk taller, breathe deeper. At the office, while others complained about bosses, deadlines, and bills, he quietly opened his notebook under the desk. The childlike drawings, once embarrassing, now looked like prophecies. Every line was a reminder. You were meant for more. But the fire inside him wasn't gentle. It was restless, impatient. The life he had settled into, routine, safe, suffocating, suddenly felt unbearable. He no longer wanted to live as a shadow of the boy who once dreamed of touching the stars. That evening, he skipped the bar where co-workers drowned their frustrations. Instead, he went home, shut the door, and sat again at his desk. This time, he didn't just write. He built. He searched online tutorials, scribbled plans, and taped sketches to his wall. His tiny room slowly transformed into a sanctuary of rebirth. The broken mirror still hung there, but now it reflected something new, pages taped in messy rows, glowing with possibility. His walls became windows to the life he wanted. Each drawing, each note, was fuel. But fire attracts both warmth and danger. Alongside his growing passion came fear. What if he failed again? What if this was just another burst of hope that would collapse into disappointment? One night, as rain battered his window, he sat frozen, pen in hand. The whispers returned. You're dreaming too big. You're wasting time. You'll never make it. He wanted to quit right there, to close the notebook forever. But then, his eyes landed on one sketch taped above his desk, a rocket, the very first drawing from his childhood. Beneath it, in his own messy handwriting, were 3 words he had scribbled at age 12. Never give up. Tears blurred his vision. He pressed his forehead against the page, as if the younger version of himself were speaking directly to him. That night, the fire roared back, fiercer than ever. He realized something powerful. Failure wasn't the end. Stopping was the end. And he was done stopping. So he worked. Night after night. The clock struck midnight, then 2, then 4, but he didn't care. His tiny lamp glowed against the dark, and his dreams grew louder with every stroke of his pen. The fire had returned. Not the naive flame of childhood, but a steady, unshakable blaze. One that whispered not of fantasies, but of possibilities. One that told him, this time, you won't let go. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, this wasn't just the fire of a dreamer. This was the fire of a man ready to rewrite his life. The nights had grown longer, but his lamp still burned. Papers scattered across the desk, walls lined with sketches. His room looked less like a home and more like the inside of his mind, messy, brilliant, restless. Yet with every stroke of his pen, doubt grew heavier. He sat hunched over his desk one evening, head in his hands. Outside, the city roared with life, sirens, car horns, laughter from bars. But inside, silence pressed down on him. Silence heavy enough to choke. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, am I wasting my life? He thought of the bills piling up, his boss's disapproving glare, the friends who mocked him when he skipped nights out. You think you're special, they'd sneer. Grow up. Life doesn't work like that. Their words replayed like a broken record in his head. And it wasn't just their voices, it was his own. The cruel part of himself that had been waiting for him to stumble. You're too old to dream now. You failed before, you'll fail again. You're not enough. His pen slipped from his hand, clattering onto the desk. He pressed his palms to his temples, as if he could crush the voices into silence. But they only grew louder. That night, he left the desk and went outside. The rain had just ended, leaving the streets slick and shining under the dim glow of street lamps. He walked aimlessly, his reflection rippling in puddles. For the first time in months, he felt small again, like the boy who once lay awake staring at a cracked ceiling, afraid the world would swallow him whole. At a corner, he stopped. Across the street was a cafe, warm light spilling out, families laughing inside. He stood in the rain-soaked dark, watching them, a stranger to that kind of ease. Doubt weighed on him like chains. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was never meant for more. But then, a sound pulled him back, a faint laugh, high and pure. He turned. On the steps of the building behind him sat a little boy, no older than 8, scribbling in a notebook under the weak glow of a streetlight. His shoes were torn, his jacket too thin, but his eyes glowed with a fire the man recognized instantly. The boy looked up, caught him staring, and grinned shyly. "I'm going to build a robot one day," the kid said proudly, holding up the messy sketches. "And it's going to be amazing." For a moment, time froze. The man saw himself in that child, the same hunger, the same defiance against the ordinary. His throat tightened. He wanted to tell the boy not to stop, to guard that fire, to never listen when the world called him foolish. But instead, he just whispered, "Don't give up." The boy nodded, as if the words were a promise carved into stone, and went back to drawing. As the man walked home, rain dripping down his face, something shifted inside him. The weight of doubt was still there, pressing heavy, but now it wasn't alone. Alongside it was a reminder. Dreams aren't fragile because they're foolish. They're fragile because the world fears their strength. Back in his room, he sat at the desk again. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen. Doubt screamed, but so did hope. He stared at the sketch of his childhood rocket taped to the wall, the words beneath it, "Never give up," blazing like fire. And for the first time, he realized, courage doesn't mean the absence of doubt. Courage means carrying the weight of doubt and still moving forward. So he wrote, not because he was sure, but because he refused to let fear have the last word. The weight of doubt pressed hard against his chest, but he kept writing anyway. The morning came heavy, like a weight pressing down on his chest before he even opened his eyes. The alarm buzzed on the nightstand, shrill and merciless. He slapped it off, but the silence afterward wasn't peace. It was suffocation. Bills lay scattered on the kitchen table. His phone buzzed with messages from his boss, cold and impatient. "We need results. Stop wasting time." He dragged himself to work that day. The office was a blur of gray walls, clicking keyboards, fluorescent lights that hummed endlessly like a swarm of insects. Everyone moved fast, chasing numbers, chasing deadlines, chasing paychecks. He sat at his desk, his dreams folded and hidden in the back pocket of his mind, suffocating under spreadsheets and charts. But inside he was breaking. He had tried to balance both worlds, the dreamer and the worker, but the cracks were widening. His mind wandered to his notebook at home, the one with pages of blueprints and words scribbled at 3 a.m. Every time he looked at the office clock, he imagined what he could be building instead. By noon, his boss called him in. The office was small, suffocating, lined with certificates and cheap motivational posters that mocked more than inspired. "You're distracted," the boss snapped, leaning forward, his tie hanging like a noose. "Your numbers are down. Either focus, or you're out." The words hit like a slap. For a second, he wanted to scream. "Do you know what I'm capable of? Do you know what I'm trying to build?" But he swallowed it. He nodded silently and walked out, but the fire inside him was boiling. That night, he sat alone in his room, the city lights flickering through the window. His notebook lay open in front of him. He flipped through the pages, sketches of inventions, half-written speeches, designs that could change lives. His chest tightened. Was this all going to die here? In a dusty room, never leaving paper? He pressed his palms to his face and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." And then, like a storm breaking loose, the emotions he had buried for years erupted. He slammed the notebook shut, tossed it across the room, and shouted into the silence. His voice cracked, raw with pain. He punched the wall until his knuckles bled, until his body gave out, until he collapsed to the floor. Tears streamed down his face. He wasn't just crying for the failures. He was crying for the boy he used to be. The boy who once looked at the cracked ceiling and saw possibility. The boy who raised his arms to the morning sun, convinced he could hold the world. Where had that boy gone? On the floor, shaking, he whispered again, I can't. But then, through the blur of tears, his eyes landed on something. The rocket sketch, taped to the wall years ago, edges curling with time. Beneath it, in bold, shaky handwriting, "Never give up." He stared at it. The words cut through the fog like a blade. Never give up. His breathing slowed. His fists unclenched. And for the first time in hours, His body stopped shaking. He crawled across the floor, picked up the notebook, and hugged it against his chest as if it were the last piece of him left. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because sometimes you have to fall apart completely to understand what you're really made of. Sometimes the cracks aren't proof of weakness. They're proof that something inside is too powerful to stay contained. That night, he didn't fix everything. He didn't erase the doubt, or the pain, or the fear. But he made a decision. He would not let his breaking point be his ending. He would rise, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. And as he drifted into an exhausted sleep, his notebook resting beside him, one thought burned brighter than all the fear, louder than all the doubt. This is not where my story ends. The city was restless that morning. Horns blared, footsteps echoed, and neon signs blinked over faces that looked tired of chasing something they couldn't name. He walked among them, shoulders heavy, the weight of yesterday's breakdown still lingering in his chest. His knuckles were bandaged from punching the wall, and every throb reminded him of how close he had come to giving up. But something inside refused to die. The rocket sketch, the words "never give up." They followed him like a shadow. Still, the doubt was louder. Every voice from the past, his boss, his family, his own inner critic, whispered, "You're not enough. Dreams don't pay bills. Stop pretending." He sat on a park bench that afternoon, notebook in hand. The pages fluttered in the breeze, each one filled with ideas he didn't know if he could bring to life. His pen hovered, but nothing came. His mind was blank, his spirit drained. For a moment, he thought about closing the notebook for good. That's when he heard it, a calm, steady voice behind him. "You look like a man fighting two battles at once." He turned. An older man stood there, silver hair peeking from under a worn cap, eyes sharp yet kind. His clothes were simple, but his presence carried weight, like someone who had lived many lives and carried many scars. I guess you could say that," he muttered, unsure why he was even answering. The man sat beside him without asking, as if he belonged there. "You remind me of myself when I was younger. Lost, angry, ready to burn it all down because the world didn't understand me." He frowned. "And what happened? Did you burn it down?" The man chuckled softly, eyes glinting with memory. "Almost. But someone stopped me. Someone who told me the truth I didn't want to hear. That pain isn't the end. It's the doorway. You either let it destroy you, or you use it to rebuild." The words settled into him like stones sinking into water. He wanted to brush them off, but he couldn't. "Easy for you to say," he snapped. "You don't know what I've been through." The man's smile faded. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a forearm scarred and burned, the skin twisted from an old fire. His voice grew quiet. "You're right. I don't know your exact pain, but I know what it's like to wake up with nothing, to lose everything you thought you were, and I know what it feels like to want to quit." Silence. The traffic, the laughter of children in the distance, the rustle of leaves, all faded into the background. He stared at the man's scars, realizing this wasn't pity speaking. This was survival. "What stopped you?" he finally asked. The man leaned back, gazing at the sky. "A mentor. He looked me in the eyes and said, 'Your story isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone who will be inspired by it.' That's when I realized quitting wasn't just giving up on me. It was giving up on everyone who needed to see me rise." The words hit like thunder. Not just yours. He had been so consumed with his own pain, his own failures, that he never considered his dream could mean something for someone else. The man stood to leave, but before walking away, he placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're standing at a crossroad. Either you let this moment define your end, or you let it define your beginning. But remember, someone out there is waiting to hear your story. Don't keep them waiting." And just like that, the stranger was gone. He sat frozen on the bench, the echo of those words vibrating inside him. His chest felt tight, but this time it wasn't despair. It was something rising, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, he opened his notebook again. For hours, he wrote. Not perfect words, not flawless designs, but raw ideas straight from the heart. His pen scratched across the paper as if it were trying to catch up with a fire that had been reignited. For the first time, he He wasn't writing just for himself. He imagined a kid somewhere, tired, broken, thinking about giving up. And he thought, if my dream survives, maybe theirs will too. The mentor's voice lived inside him now, guiding his hand, steadying his resolve. The breaking point had nearly ended him, but the mentor's words rebuilt him. And as the clock struck midnight, he whispered into the quiet, I'll keep going. Not just for me, for them. The fire inside him burned brighter than ever, but he soon realized that fire demanded a price. Dreams, he discovered, are never free. Each step forward required a sacrifice, a surrender of comfort, of certainty, of old patterns that once felt safe. He walked through the city streets at dawn, notebook clutched tightly in his hand, and noticed how life around him moved effortlessly. People rushed to cafes, to offices, to routines that demanded nothing of their hearts. And yet, he could feel the weight of what he had chosen. Every late night, every skipped party, every silent refusal to settle, it all added up. The world had not paused for him, nor had it promised ease. That evening, he sat in his tiny room, the soft hum of a street lamp through the window, and began sketching again. But the drawings didn't come as easily as before. His mind wrestled with exhaustion. His body ached from the long hours of relentless effort. Doubt lingered, whispering, is this worth it? He looked around at the bills stacked in the corner, the old textbooks that were gathering dust, the half-eaten meals on the counter. Every choice he had made to pursue his dream, instead of settling for safety, had left marks. Sacrifice had a way of staining life. But amidst the struggle, there was also clarity. He remembered the mentor's voice, echoing in the silence. Your story isn't just yours. Someone is waiting to see you rise. And in that thought, he found courage. Sacrifice wasn't punishment, it was investment. Every sleepless night, every lonely meal, every moment of doubt was a deposit in the bank of possibility. Weeks turned into months. He worked tirelessly, juggling a day job that barely paid, while nights were consumed by sketches, research, and small experiments. His social life disappeared, friends drifted away, and family questioned his sanity. Why can't you just be practical? They asked. But he knew that practicality had never built empires, written history, or sent rockets into the sky. Sacrifice was lonely, but it was sacred. One particularly hard night, his body trembling from exhaustion, he stared at the sketches on the wall. Bridges, towers, machines that defied logic. They were beautiful in their impossibility. And in their beauty, he saw the reason he endured. Sacrifice wasn't the weight on his shoulders. It was the bridge to his future. He thought about all the moments he had almost given up. The broken mirror, the doubt, the night he had cried on the floor. Each of those moments had demanded something from him. Yes, but each had also built something stronger inside him. Sacrifice, he realized, was the hidden fuel of greatness. By dawn, he was still awake, hands ink-stained, face weary but glowing with purpose. He looked out the window at the first rays of light breaking through the city's gray skyline. Somewhere below, the city moved on without him, indifferent. But he didn't care. His path was his own. And every lonely step, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it was bringing him closer to the dream that had once seemed impossible. In the quiet of that room, he whispered softly, not to anyone but to himself, this is worth it. Every bit of it. I'll endure. I'll sacrifice. I'll rise. And in that moment, he understood a truth that the world rarely teaches. Greatness is never comfortable. It demands surrender, struggle, and solitude. But for those willing to pay the price, the reward is a life that echoes far beyond the limits of ordinary existence. He returned to his sketches, more determined than ever, knowing the road of sacrifice was long, painful, and unforgiving, but also the only road to the life he was destined to create. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavy yet full of possibility. He sat at his desk, fingers trembling, staring at the blueprint he had been laboring over for months. For so long, his nights had been filled with struggle, sacrifices, doubts, and endless questions. And now, finally, he was here. The model sat before him, fragile but complete. Every line, every angle, every connection was exactly as he had envisioned. He held his breath, barely daring to touch it. Then, slowly, he He pressed a finger to one of the tiny mechanisms. It moved. Smoothly. Perfectly. Tears welled in his eyes. This wasn't just a model. It was proof. Proof that persistence, fire, and sacrifice could turn dreams into reality. He laughed softly, the sound raw and trembling, echoing through the small room. He remembered the nights he had cried over the broken mirror, the long hours filled with doubt, the lonely walks in the rain. Every moment had been a step toward this victory. And now, holding the result of his relentless effort, he realized something profound. Victories are sweeter when they are earned through struggle. He picked up his phone and recorded a short video, explaining the mechanism, his voice quivering with emotion. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. "I've fought too long. I've sacrificed too much. To stop now. And if I can do this, anyone can." Hours passed, and his excitement didn't fade. The first victory had ignited a spark that no amount of doubt or fear could extinguish. The city outside moved on indifferent, but inside his small room, the world had changed. He began planning the next steps immediately, refining designs, reaching out to mentors, imagining what he could build next. This first success was not an endpoint, it was a gateway. Every challenge he had faced, every sacrifice, every sleepless night had prepared him for this moment. And yet, he knew the journey was far from over. This victory, though monumental, was only a taste of what was possible. It reminded him that dreams aren't fulfilled in a single moment. They are conquered step by step, victory by victory, with persistence as the engine and faith as the fuel. Late into the night, he sat back, eyes bright and heart racing. For the first time in years, he felt invincible. Not because he had achieved something extraordinary, but because he had proven to himself that he could rise after falling, that he could fight despite fear, that he could create even in the face of doubt. And as he looked at the model, gleaming under the lamplight, he whispered softly, but with fierce certainty, "This is just the first of many. The dream is alive, and I am alive with it." The first victory was never about fame or recognition. It was about reclaiming himself, rediscovering his fire, and realizing that nothing could stop him once he decided to rise. The first light of dawn crept into his room, spilling across the scattered papers and blueprints, illuminating the small victories of months-long struggle. The model of his creation sat at the center of the desk, gleaming like a monument to resilience. Yet he didn't feel finished. He felt awakened. The horizon beyond these walls stretched endlessly, and for the first time, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt alive, waiting for him to claim it. He walked to the window, hands pressed to the cold glass, and gazed at the city below. Cars moved like rivers, pedestrians surged like tides, and the world seemed indifferent. And yet, for him, the indifference was liberation. No one was stopping him. No one dictated how far he could go. He was free to chase, to build, to rise. The months of struggle, sleepless nights, and sacrifices had forged a new version of himself. One who knew fear intimately but refused to let it dictate his path. One who had stared at doubt, despair, and exhaustion, and still chosen to take the next step. The boy who had once cried before a broken mirror now stood taller, fiercer, unshakable. He opened his notebook, pages filled with ideas both wild and brilliant. He began mapping the next project, letting creativity flow without restraint. He paused, smiling at a small note he had written years ago in childish handwriting. "Reach the stars." How literal, how symbolic, how urgent it had become. Outside, the city roused with routine, but inside him, the pulse of possibility throbbed louder than traffic, louder than sirens, louder than fear. The horizon was no longer a line in the distance. It was a canvas, waiting for his vision. Every obstacle he had faced, the mirror, the doubt, the breaking point, the sacrifices, had prepared him for this moment. And now, the path ahead was clear. He whispered to himself, soft but resolute, "I'm ready." Ready to face setbacks, to encounter failures, to keep learning. Ready to embrace the unknown, fueled by the fire of his first victory and the lessons of every struggle. Ready to inspire, to lead, and to create a legacy that mattered. Hours passed unnoticed. His mind raced with possibilities. Hand sketching, calculating, dreaming, building. The horizon seemed to stretch infinitely, a promise shimmering with potential. He realized that success was not a single summit, but a series of mountains, each climb demanding courage, endurance, and faith. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, he paused and looked at his reflection in the window glass. The boy who once doubted, the man who once fell, the dreamer who almost gave up, they all stared back, fused into one resilient soul. The fire in his eyes had returned, not fragile, not hesitant, but steady, alive, unstoppable. He whispered again, as if making a vow. This is only the beginning. The horizon ahead is mine to claim. Every step I take, every risk I embrace, every dream I pursue, it all leads forward. I will rise, and I will carry others with me. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, a dream had awakened fully. The broken mirror, the sleepless nights, the doubts, they were no longer chains, but stepping stones. The first victory was behind him, and an endless horizon awaited. And as he gazed at the night turning into day, he felt something he hadn't in years, unshakable hope, a fire that would burn beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond failure. The horizon wasn't distant, it was his. With a final deep breath, he turned back to his desk, to his notebook, to his dreams, and whispered with certainty, "The journey continues, and this time, nothing will stop me." As we follow our protagonist's journey, notice the vocabulary and expressions embedded naturally in context. Breakthrough, used when he experiences the first victory. A breakthrough isn't just a small success. It's a significant leap forward after struggle. Every struggle led to a breakthrough that changed his perspective. Resilient describes someone who keeps going despite hardships. He became resilient, standing taller after every failure. To rise from the ashes, an idiomatic expression meaning to recover from defeat or hardship. Like a phoenix, he rose from the ashes of doubt and despair. Forge a path. To create your own way in life. He knew he had to forge a path no one else could dictate. Embrace the unknown, accepting uncertainty as part of growth. He learned to embrace the unknown, understanding that fear often signals the threshold to greatness. Pay the price, used to highlight the sacrifices required for success. Every sleepless night and lonely hour was part of the price he paid for his dreams. The horizon ahead symbolizes future possibilities. The horizon ahead was limitless, waiting for his courage to claim it. By noticing these phrases in context, you can expand your vocabulary while internalizing how they apply to real-life storytelling or motivational speaking. Never underestimate small steps. Even a trembling first step can lead to monumental breakthroughs. Start today, however small your action may seem. Embrace discomfort and sacrifice. Growth comes with challenges. Success demands that you endure uncertainty and make tough choices. Turn doubt into fuel. Doubt is natural, but it should ignite your determination, not halt your progress. Seek guidance, but trust yourself. Mentors can light the path, but only you can walk it. Listen, learn, and act. Your journey inspires others. Every struggle, every victory, every failure has the potential to motivate someone else. Live your story fully. Remember, the fire inside you is not fragile, it's unstoppable. Life will test you with doubt, fear, and failure. But the true measure of greatness is your courage to rise again and again. Your first victory may be small, but it signals the start of an endless horizon. Forge your path, embrace the unknown, pay the price, and rise. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who will one day look at your journey and say, "If they can do it, so can I." Stand tall, dream boldly, and never, ever give up.